Good afternoon. Welcome. Thank you for coming. This is one of the inaugural events for the launch of the China Sustainability Program of the Earth Institute that Professor André Almeida and myself are launching. The program is a space to welcome opinions, initiatives about China, produced not only from Columbia, but from other universities and for sure from China. We have the privilege of having two distinguished speakers and specialists on China in their respective area. Stephen Roach, author of many books, very good friend. Stephen, thank you very much for accepting to be here once again. I don't know if you remember last year, it was in Halloween Day that you accepted to come here, and we had a debate with full house, Halloween Day. So it's the proof that you have really the capacity to attract large audiences. Stephen is going to speak about a book that he just published, the problem of codependency between the US and China. Am I right? Mr. Tanaka, Nobuo Tanaka, he's an old friend, personal and a good friend of Columbia. He's the former managing director of the International Energy Agency, where he has really produced groundbreaking work, and he has taken initiatives that really, in my view, have changed the image of the International Energy Agency. He's going to speak about the energy challenges in Asia, and more specifically, the energy challenges of China. So once again, thank you very much for being here with us, and I hope that you'll participate in the events and initiatives that we want to launch from the China Sustainability Program of the Earth Institute. Thank you.
Okay, what I thought I'd do tonight is address what I believe is the most important economic relationship in the world today and tomorrow. And by tomorrow, I mean the first half of the 21st century. And we know that we've got the two largest economies in the world, two largest exporters in the world, but I would have to say, with all fairness and frankness, that right now it's a troubled relationship. And there are troubles that both nations must address, because there are tensions on the currency front, the trade front, the security front, the cyber front. And as we see 2 weeks ago tonight, I was in Hong Kong Central, in the streets of Hong Kong. And it's a relationship that has risk but opportunity, and it's incumbent upon us to assess both the risks and the opportunities of this complex, challenging relationship. There are obviously contrasts between the United States and China that are very evident to even the most casual observer. America is the quintessential bastion of the invisible hand. We don't plan because Adam Smith a long time ago told us, don't plan. Just believe in the brilliance of the markets and everything will be fine. And we saw how fine it was 5 or 6 years ago when we let the invisible hand take us into the worst crisis since the 1930s. China, of course, doesn't take anything for granted. Planning is part of the character, the persona, the identity of a nation that has relied on Soviet-style planning since the 1950s, State Planning Commission, which has now taken the form of the National Development and Reform Commission, the NDRC, who decides on the plans as well as the implementation of the policies associated with the plans. America is all about the consumer driving 70% of the economy. We are the ultimate consumer. We stop at nothing to consume. China's the ultimate producer, stops at nothing to produce. And yet, both models have their strengths and their weaknesses, and for the time being, those strengths and weaknesses fit together very nicely. America's strengths become a support to China, and China's strengths become a support to America. In many respects, as you can see here, we are mirror images of one another. The ultimate consumer has consumed well beyond its means because of the cheap goods that come from China, the cheap capital that comes from China, the fact that China is willing to invest its surplus savings, the savings of the people, in U.S. Treasuries, which helps America deal with its chronic deficit problem. China has grown beyond its wildest dreams as a producer, able to sell its goods to American consumers and linking its currency to the dollar. It's a mutual dependency or a codependency. We couldn't have done our consumer-led growth without China, and China could not have done its producer-led growth without America. Codependency works in economic relationships and in human relationships only for a while. It's not sustainable. Don't kid yourself. In researching my book, I became an amateur psychologist. So I studied codependency from the standpoint of how a psychologist would examine it. And I discovered that it's really a dangerous pathological disorder in human relationships. It's really a relationship addiction where two partners become so addicted on the feedback they provide each other, they become lost in terms of who they are as individuals. You lose a sense of self. It's a very reactive and progressive disorder. And in fact, if you go to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders published by the American Psychiatric Association, you'll find that there is a clear scale, 1 to 7, that describes the health or lack thereof of this relationship addiction known as dependency, or in a partnered relationship known as codependency. And it gets progressively worse as you go through the scale. And the more you derive your satisfaction from the other, the more you progress into the more damaging and risky phases of dependency. I would say that the U.S. and China right now are in stages 4, 5, and 6. And the risk is we go to stage 7. Now, look, I'm not a psychologist. In the interest of full disclosure, I will tell you I am married to one. She knows a lot more about it than I do. And she has some serious questions about whether or not this is relevant for economics. I say, look, her name is Katie. And I say, Katie, you do psychology, I'll do economics. So we had a big fight over this, so she's not here tonight. But I think as different as the study of psychology is than economics, there are some reasonable ways to frame the relationship between the United States and China in this context. So here's the story that I'm going to tell you tonight. It's got a timeline that began in 1978, and there are three key dates that I want to stress in telling the tale of U.S.-China in the framework of this economic version of the psychology of codependency. 1978, 2007, and 2013. In the beginning, both countries were in serious trouble. China in 1978, aftermath of the Cultural Revolution. Mao Zedong had been dead for 2 years. There was a very difficult, high-risk leadership transition. The Chinese economy was poor. It was on the brink, as many would say, of catastrophic failure in the late 1970s. The United States was in a not nearly as precarious a state, but in a very tough place. We called it stagflation. Growth was slowing, inflation was rising, and so was unemployment. We were in a tough place. We both needed new recipes for economic growth. And out of that difficult environment, we turned to each other. China, the export-led growth that was forthcoming from Deng Xiaoping's very simple, fact-based, non-ideological post-cultural revolution mantra of reforms and opening up, led to spectacular increases in per capita income. China, the producer, helped satisfy America, the consumer, in ways that were mutually convenient for both. It was a blissful marriage of convenience. Not only did China give us goods, but they gave us capital. Ultimately, owning, as of the middle of last year, 16% of our official debt, $2 trillion in dollar-based assets, roughly half of China's unprecedented accumulation of foreign exchange reserves. And that was pretty helpful to us because we ran the world's biggest international payments deficits, the current account deficit that you see on the left. It shrunk, but it's still very large in dollar terms. The producer needed the consumer needed the producer, but the creditor, or the debtor, also needed the creditor. And China played an important role in that respect. The second date is 2007, where both countries were faced with major questions in their codependent marriage of convenience. Wen Jiabao, in March of 2007, before the crisis, really questioned, and I would say most people don't give him much credit for anything. I do. I give him credit for raising big questions about the sustainability of the Chinese growth recipe. He said very clearly in March of 2007 that while the economy was strong on the surface, beneath the surface, he was worried about a Chinese economy that was unstable, unbalanced, uncoordinated, and unsustainable. And that launched a huge internal debate about the sustainability of the growth model. 2007 was a wake-up call for America, the crisis that nearly brought the system down. China was hit hard. The economy went into the functional equivalent of a recession in China. You can see on the left. We were hit hard. The U.S. consumer went into a horrific, unprecedented balance sheet recession where consumption declined at a 1.8% average annual rate for 6 quarters, unprecedented since the 1930s. Both economies were in the throes of a wrenching correction after a 30-year blissful marriage of convenience. China moved aggressively, massive fiscal stimulus. We moved glacially and embraced the new, untested policy approach of quantitative easing, which fortunately we decided earlier this week to draw to an end. It was a policy that was celebrated by my former colleagues on Wall Street as being the greatest gift that Wall Street could ever ask for. But it did nothing to stimulate the real economy. The consumer, again, at the heart of the crisis and its aftermath, continued to grow anemically throughout. Which brings us to the final date in the tale last year, 2013. China convened the third plenum of the Central Committee of the 18th Party Congress. And this was I think, the conclusive aspect of the debate triggered by the critique of Wen Jiabao about the structural transformation of China, and enacted 60 articles of reform, 235 specific initiatives that sealed the fate on the shift of the economic structure from the producer to the consumer. A month earlier in America, our government got together and decided to shut it down. That was our response. China moved, and we didn't. Of course, we voted this week, and it's too soon to tell what, if anything, will come out of that. You put it together over this period, there's evidence of, I think, a clear commitment on the part of China to change the model. And again, being the amateur psychologist that I now claim to be, the only way that individuals can deal with the stresses and strains of codependency is to become healthier and change their sense of self. And China, through the combination of the 12th five-year plan and the third plenum, is doing, in fact, that. And what are we doing? We're just sort of going down the road the way we always have, not saving and hoping that others will fill the void. How do I put this together? Well, I do want you to read the book, so I'm not going to tell you the whole ending. But my base case is not an optimistic one from an economic point of view. I think China's going to rebalance its economy. I think there's evidence that's already occurring. We can talk about that in the Q&A. But in a codependent relationship, whether it's between people or economies, when one partner changes, there are consequences for the other. And that's America's wake-up call. China's going from surplus saving to saving absorption. What does that mean? It means that it's putting its saving to work in funding the safety net of its own people, rather than buying treasuries that will support the American people. And if we don't change, if we don't start to save, that has consequences for us in terms of interest rates, the dollar, and our ability to fund our saving short, deficit-prone economy. I've got a whole, nice little scenario here to show you how that works, but I've spoken too long. But just watch the way these lines flip around. I mean, this is the baseline saving trajectory. China and the U.S. China saves so much, and America saves so little. So in a baseline case, China absorbs its saving, and we don't, and we're in trouble. But, the editors, when I was, writing this sort of disaster scenario, they said, you can't end with a scary ending, you must end with a happy ending. So I gave them this. The U.S. miraculously figures out how to save again, and we all live happily ever after. Because we save more, and we boost our competitiveness, and we transform ourselves from the ultimate consumer to producers that can be more competitive and sell things to rapidly growing consumer societies like China. Do you believe that? I don't. But anyway, there's always two sides to every story, and I'll end on the note I started with. I'll put on my hat as a shrink psychologist and say that if you are in a codependent relationship, any of you in this room, watch out, you're in trouble. And if you're running an economy that's in a codependent relationship, it's the same deal. For America and China, the challenge is to go from codependency to interdependency. It's a much healthier, more sustainable relationship where the individuals or the economies responsibly satisfy their own needs rather than demand the partners to serve their needs. They maintain a strong sense of who they are rather than lose their sense of self. And their interactions are constructive rather than steeped in denial and in a destructive blame game. Codependency is unsustainable. Interdependency works. Will the U.S. and China have the vision to break the shackles of codependency? That's up to you. Thank you.
Okay, after Stefan's very, very interesting expose about China-United States relationship, I will more focus on the energy sector, but certainly I supplement of what he's arguing about this codependency issues of China and the United States to some extent, very interestingly. And I felt that what Stefan explained about China-U.S. relationship seems to be a little past of the Japan-U.S. relationship in terms of trade balance, etc., interdependency on economy. Japan was a huge exporter. Now China replaces the role or criticism which Japan faced some time ago. Let me talk more on the energy security and sustainability issues. Currently, the big uncertainty or geopolitical risk is in the Middle East and Russia. The short-term Iraq situation is always the focal point of everybody, ISIS or Islamic State. But to our surprise, the production of Iraq in oil is increasing even in September. By the way, this creates huge surprise to the market, and also together with the slowdown or depression in Europe and slowdown in China, the demand side slowed down with supply side upbeat, create a huge surprise in the market and the collapse of the prices happening now. How far it will go will be interesting because always financial market amplify this kind of move, upward or downward. Now downward amplification is happening. Now the oil price is $70 some per barrel. Another crisis is Russia. Thanks to the Ukraine civil war and catastrophe, the financial sanction by the G8 countries over Russia is creating huge potential risk of energy security. Though, while in the short-term problems, there are long-term trends, and game changer is always China, not OECD countries. OECD has about 64% of the gross sharing of the energy demand, while China, India, and ASEAN countries shared more than 65%. The growth of demand of energy happens in Asia. So by doing so, the energy security issues is the issue for Asia. And fossil fuel will continue to be very important. Gas, coal, oil. Renewable nuclear will increase, but certainly still fossil fuel, 75% of the energy will be supplied by fossil fuel in 2035. When two important fossil fuel, oil and gas, as a kind of indicator of self-sufficiency, the vertical axis is gas dependency. On the other hand, horizontally, it is oil. So the right-hand top is importer of both gas and oil, while left-hand bottom is the exporter of both. Many of the countries, it's consumer countries in the blue section. Mostly all of them, except the United States and Brazil, are increasing dependency to import of both gas and oil. China currently about 60% dependent on oil import, while 20% on gas, will come to 80% oil import dependency and 40% gas dependency in 2035. Very serious concern on the energy security. Further in India, Japan, Korea is right-hand side top. Already we are importing 100% of gas and oil. We can never be worse. US moves different direction. It moves from about 30% of oil, 60% of oil dependency toward 20%. Yes, for the gas, it comes down to minus, means exporter. LNG exportation is quite a famous story that shale revolution makes US a so-called energy independence. Yes, consumer is in this right-hand side, exporters in the other side, and US in the middle. So this is a very strong geopolitical advantage US has between the producer and consumer. And China, as a major consumer in the energy sector, while US has a good leverage between them, and independent from Middle East, independent from Russia, US can manipulate the global relationship to its own interest, and that is what is happening now. Yes, oil from Middle East will go to 90% to Asia. China is the largest importer, while US will no longer need any oil from Middle East. Will US continue to protect the free navigation of the Strait of Hormuz in 2035, or just leave it to China or India or Asian economies? Or at least United States opinion, the public opinion will seek the burden sharing from these countries. Japan's current Abe government is talking about collective self-defense and sending minesweepers to the Persian Gulf if in case. But this kind of geopolitical change is certainly means something for Asian countries, especially China. Hormuz Strait has 85% of oil for Japan, but 40% of oil for the world. This is a huge risk area. The gas, the same thing. China is preparing for the risk by pipeline connection. By the way, this chart is provided by United States Defense Department's China report to the Congress in June. So how U.S. concerns about the China's movement, not only pipeline, but sea lane protection for its import of oil as well as gas. IEA is the developed countries' watchdog of oil market, but I think China and India should use IEA as such to protect its energy security by joining. That is my strong view. Current price of oil is sustainable? This is interesting question. This is some time ago, about 3 years ago, IEA made this chart of what is possible break-even cost of oil price for different producers. Blue is the operation cost, while green is a budget break-even cost. Saudi Arabia budget break-even is beyond more than $80 per barrel, between 80 to 100. Current price is almost the lower limit of the Saudis' budget balancing. It's much lower than Iran. It's much lower for Russia. So these countries have serious problems. Will Saudi continue to sustain current level to force Iran and Russia go bankrupt? This is an interesting question. And also testing so-called shale revolution in the United States. Will shale developer continue to invest by this price level? Very interesting, another question. So price of oil is difficult to foresee in the short term, but a longer term, demand of Asian economies increase, so certainly it will come back to the upper trends gradually. China certainly prefers lower prices, but high price of energy is always very important elements the Asian development countries must take into account for future. Shale gas revolution and who are the winner and losers, it's obvious United States is a winner. China is very serious about shale development. I'm sure that to replace coal, China will succeed in developing shale gas. It may take some time. Pricing is the issue. Japan or China or Korea, these Asian economies suffer the very high so-called Asian premium for LNG. The US price is so low because the oil price is high. Why? Because gas produced with liquid content or oil can be produced with associate gas. So if oil price is high, you can get the revenue with that and gas can be supplied for very cheap price or even free or burn it as flaring. So the higher the oil price, the lower the gas price. That is what this shale revolution created in the North America. But what would happen if oil price goes down? Eventually gas price will go up. That is what this chart says. Very interesting question for those importers, possible importers of shale gas from the United States. Indexation to the oil price is better, or buying gas from US in Henry Hub-based price is better? This is a very interesting dilemma for the importers in the future. Petrochemical renaissance is happening thanks to the very cheap oil and gas price. US price will make a difference in Asia, and this will be the opportunity for the Asian countries to reduce, but still the gas price is high. Japan is importing huge amount of gas, and cost is quite big. Nuclear power plant may come back gradually, but still take some time. What's the cost of power, energy for these countries? Comparing with United States, Japan's gas price is about 5 times higher than US. It may come down, but still more than double. China price is about double of US price. Will these countries compete? This is interesting question. Electricity, same thing. Japan is paying more than double of the electricity price in 2035 than the US. IA analyzed the winner of the shale revolution is, yes, China, Middle East, India, those growing countries or emerging economies, and the United States. Big losers are Europe and Japan for the exportation of energy-intensive goods. I was told by the European leaders some time ago, how can Japan compete with the United States without nuclear power? It is a very good question. I said, no way. The fourth arrow of Abenomics is to restart nuclear power. Otherwise, Japan is in very serious situation. Russia is important because eventually the shale oil production in the United States will decline. This graph shows that Middle East will continue to be important after 2025 relative to the shale oil from the United States. And Russia is moving toward east, especially China. Thanks to the Ukraine sanction, Russia made a deal with China of exportation of the gas, which were discussed over decades but didn't make conclusion. And finally, in the last June, they made a deal. This windfall opportunity is certainly good for not only China but for Asian countries, because pipeline will come closer to the Pacific, and it a very good benefits for Japan too. If Japan had a pipeline with Russia, it could be much cheaper than importing by LNG. More diversified sourcing is important. But under this financial sanction, can Japan build the pipeline with Russia? Many of the international oil companies are worrying about, or more confused, or more frustrated with this financial sanction. I may think that United States is shooting yourself in the foot by doing this. We'll see. Regional security framework of East Asia is getting more and more important because it's an energy demand growing center. How can secure the energy source collectively is the issue. This chart shows the self-sufficiency rating of different countries by the fossil fuel and renewables. Yellow nuclear is considered to be a good supplement where the self-sufficiency is low, such as France, such as Belgium, such as Korea, such as Japan. Many countries in Europe has a different portfolio, a mix, but connecting each other, they protect the market as one. Second from the bottom, that is European 28, and self-sufficiency rate is about 50% and very well diversified. But it is not average. They are connecting market by pipelines and grid lines. So Germany can phase out nuclear by importing electricity from France. This is pipeline. There's an idea of pipeline connection in the Northeast Asia. Only country which really materialized this pipeline connection is China. Japan is still out of the linkage. I am strong view that Japan should be a part of this connection or linkage as a collective energy security framework, so to speak. ASEAN countries working. Power grid connection in Europe is like this. In fact, in Europe, it is Spain and Portugal, where Minister Pinho, when he was Minister of Portugal, I was the executive director and very impressed with his great endeavor to move toward renewables. Spain, the same thing. But these two countries in Iberia Peninsula were not connected to the mainland. The connection is so small that their renewables need big backup of gas turbines. The cost is getting very high. The Spain is requesting the unified energy policy of Europe for its own benefit. Connectivity is a very important issue for using more renewables. So sustainability and energy security can be achieved at the same time by connecting each other. Even Europe is moving toward North Africa by connecting grid lines and call it energy for peace. Why not energy for peace in Asia? This is the idea of Masayoshi Son, the CEO of SoftBank, trying to import electricity from Gobi Desert of Mongolia. Very innovative, visionary idea, but why not? Sustainability challenge, you know that IPCC report is now telling us that we have only 28 years of CO2 emission to achieve 2 degrees Celsius scenario. It is a huge challenge for developing countries. US is so lucky because of shale revolution. By switching from coal to gas, US successfully reduced CO2 emission while maintaining economic growth. But this is a luxury only for the US. Not other countries can do. Is coal an option? I don't think so. Because developing economies, including China, needs huge demand for coal to generate power. China is trying to moderate the use of coal, which was the case before. The coal was the major source of the power, and still it is. But for the sake of air pollution, China is trying to shift away from coal now. But other countries like India or the rest of the Asia needs to depend on coal heavily. So the technologies to reduce CO2 emission by storing in the underground CCS or very high efficient coal power plant technology is really necessary for these countries to be sustainable, at the same time secure the supply of energy. We need all technologies, not only self-efficiency, but renewables, nuclear, CCS, but the cost is very high. IEA says we have to build 16 gigawatt of nuclear power every year from now to 2050, or price of carbon should be more than $100. The huge challenge. Even it seems to me almost impossible game we are going to play. Next year in Paris, in COP21, we are requested to make commitment. It's a bottom-up approach, so it's slightly different from the top-down. So something could happen. But certainly the major players like China and the United States should lead the other countries, at least toward the sustainable path. Let's finally touch upon nuclear. Post-Fukushima strategy. Japan, no nuclear power plant is running in Japan now. 2 plants are given the approval of safety standards passing and will come back to operation to the end of the year or early next year. Yes, Abe-san is always famous for using arrows. First arrow is financial stimulus. Second arrow is fiscal stimulus. Third arrow is reform. But he needs fourth arrow. That is what I mean, the restarting of the nuclear power. We are wasting $40 billion a year by importing gas and oil. Nuclear will be used by China in the future. But we sincerely hope China will use it safely because it locates west of Japan and the wind comes from China with sand, but with radioactivity. It is serious concern of the Japanese people. And we need to replace old reactors sooner or later. And my strong proposal, which I'm now working on in Columbia University, is that we have to find the path toward a fourth generation using the technologies which is already available in the United States, which is called Integral Fast Reactor. Maybe you have seen the movie Pandora's Promise. This is a very interesting movie that environmentalists thinks the nuclear as a very important option, the documentary of these people. And this reactor was introduced in the movie, which proven passive safety and proliferation-free and very easy for waste management. So these 3 conditions of the nuclear is really necessary to convince Japanese public to regain the confidence to the nuclear power. I don't want to get into the too much details of this IFR, which was developed by the Argonne National Laboratory in the United States, but this may be the future choice. Unfortunately, this technology was killed by the Clinton administration in 1994. But I am trying to revive this as a possible future model which can be used by the emerging countries like China, like India, like ASEAN countries, and Japan and Korea and the United States, especially as a leader of the nuclear power, should work together to develop this, to replace the so-called light water reactor paradigm, which was developed for the submarine or military purposes. Already GE is developing commercial version. Korea is very serious because Korea also has a problem of spent fuel. They need reprocessing, so-called pyroprocessing. I don't want to go too much of this, but let me final conclusion is that yes, Japan-US alliance is important, but China, as a major player in the energy sector, we have to work much, much closer together for the 21st century energy security and sustainability. And everybody is on us, on the energy sector, work together, and we are in the same boat. Yes, co-working is very difficult. Codependency will not work, just Mr. Roach said. But I think in the energy sector, we have to closely link our policies together. Otherwise, we may have problem. The IEA is an energy security place, starting with using the strategic stockpile collectively. And we learned a lesson from our dialogue with OPEC countries that enhancing energy security cannot be achieved by reducing the energy security of somebody else. It should be the win-win relationship. That is the only way to make energy security and sustainability at the same time to work for us. Thank you very much. I just went too high.
Hello, my name is Dang Fan, a first-year student studying energy. So basically, my question is mainly about Japan's security, energy security. As just mentioned, China and Russia have a deal in Far East about the pipelines, and Japan mainly really interested about joining this plan. But the thing is, there's historical issues between Russia and Japan in terms of national security, I mean energy security. Mm-hmm. How do Japanese governments to deal with this potential conflict basically in the northern islands between Russia and Japan, and if they're giving so much share to the Russian producer, mm-hmm. And I think maybe it will be a potential, actually a big issue for the government to solve. Sure. Not just thinking about the nuclear energy potential risk, but this is also very big geopolitical risk as well. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Very good question. In fact, currently Japan is importing about 10% of gas from Russia, about 4% of the oil from Russia too. So already we depend on Russia. So my point is, we have to diversify the sources as much as possible. That is energy security. If we depend on, Japan is currently dependent very much on the Middle East and oil. Gas is very well diversified, but the more diversification is necessary. So US exportation of shale gas will certainly help. But pipeline is much cheaper in the calculation of the cost. So pipeline cannot be set between US and Japan. So more, Russia is the most feasible pipeline deal. The geopolitical problem, as you mentioned, of the Northern Territory, yes, we have that territory issue. On the other hand, just go back to what Germany did with Russia, or at that time Soviet. Chancellor Schmidt decided to make a deal of making pipeline and try to import Russian gas. United States was fiercely against. How could you send the money to the enemy of Russia or Soviet at that time by making a deal? But Schmidt denied, overrun this criticism and decided to buy. But not too much. So they put the limit of 30% of the import. In fact, Europe is still importing only 30% of its demand from Russia as a whole. In the eastern part of the countries import much more than that. But so Japan has a certain, and then eventually the point is this. East Germany came back eventually. It was not concluded as such when West Germany decided to buy Russian gas by pipeline. So this is a very interesting model that if Japan has a good international bilateral relationship with Russia by connecting each other, maybe eventually Northern Territory may come back. Not as a whole, but partly or gradually. Who knows? So my point is probably economic relationship or interdependence is probably very important key to make the very difficult political territorial issue. And this lesson or discipline could be applied to our relationship with China or our relationship with Korea. We have similar territorial problem over the small, very small island or rock. It is ridiculous, by the way. So with having much closer tie with China by connecting grid line. Son Masayoshi's idea is connecting with Korea, connecting with China. Chinese person told me that China will eventually import gas from Iran by connecting pipeline. Why don't you buy it by connecting pipeline to Japan? There are so many countries in between Iran and Japan. Maybe Russia is much closer and probably cheaper. But network will happen. Already China is hub of the network and happening. So stay out of this network is not a good strategy for Japan. We should be a part of the network and try to make collective energy security framework like Europe. That is my lesson when I was in the IEA, International Energy Agency, and learned from what European Union is trying to do. Not easy. It takes much time. Europe took 60 years to make this. So it takes time, but we have to start that direction.
Good evening, gentlemen. I'm Tianjin Gao, a first-year energy and environment student at SIPA. And I have a question for China's energy future, which is that, rightly as you have pointed out, Mr. Tanaka, that China is trying to shift away from its consumption of coal in the future, but it is in a context of rising, in fact, soaring Chinese energy demand. So based on your assessment, which energy alternative do you think is the cheapest to meet both Chinese energy demand and can effectively reduce coal consumption?
Cheapest way of reducing coal is not using energy, right? That's energy efficiency or conservation. That is the cheapest way. It's win-win-win in terms of CO2 emission reduction, in terms of reduction of the air pollution, in terms of the economy, in terms of sustainability. That's the best way. So on top of that, all options is necessary. There's no clear single silver bullet. So nuclear is one, renewable is one, but also cleaner coal technology with CCS makes sense. So try everything and make it in the one system, which is friendly to the different nature of different technologies. So there's not easy solution, but if electricity is decarbonized, then China's policy of using electric vehicle make good sense. But before decarbonizing electricity, electric vehicle doesn't necessarily mean make sense, right? But so the industry level, transportation level, China's effort is really great. So I'm always, let's say, praising the Chinese effort of paradigm shift to more green development. And because the energy cost is getting higher and higher, carbon price is getting higher, it's inevitable. So China, India, these countries must do very different growth paradigm than United States, than Europe, or than Japan. There's no other way. So this is really challenge, but I think Chinese government or Chinese people will find a way.
Let me just add one thing to that. In a China rebalancing scenario that the government's embraced and that I support, the shift to services with obviously a very different fuel requirement and carbon footprint is already underway, and it's just beginning. But last year was the first year in modern China's history where the services sector at 46% of GDP was larger than the so-called secondary sector of manufacturing and construction at 43%. It's just beginning. So services is a key to linking the structural transformation to a more sustainable path of energy consumption and one that is more constructive to the environment. It's not enough, but it's an important step in the right direction. And by the way, all this, anxiety over the fact that, my God, China has slowed from 10 to 7% GDP growth, that's part of the story as well. Because at 7% GDP growth, which is increasingly services dominated, they can achieve everything they had achieved in the past in terms of labor absorption, but at a slower growth rate and one that is less onerous in terms of energy consumption and environmental degradation. That's the good news. The bad news is 70% of their fuel is still coal. I mean, it's come down a lot to 69%. So, long way to go.
But that's exactly the message of the 12th five-year plan. There's no solution to the energy problem without a change in the economic model. So it's, of course, the change in economic model by itself is not enough, but it's not possible to solve the energy challenge without a larger contribution from services.
Hi, my name is Kathy. I was wondering if we could get a bit of more of an explanation on the takeaway from the IPCC synthesis report that is going to take, or that developing countries only have 28 years to achieve the 2-degree limit. And the second part of the question is, there's a range of perspectives on the feasibility of 2 degrees, and it seems that the newer assessments coming out are a bit more pessimistic. So what does it still make sense for this political target to really underpin the desired climate agreement at COP21? Thank you.
Yeah, well, 20 years is just simple calculation that if current level of CO2 emission continues, in 28 years' time, that carbon budget will disappear. So that means suddenly the global community should be zero carbon emission. Otherwise, this 2 degrees Celsius or their scenario cannot be achievable. That is what they say. So it is only mean from the carbon budgeting, we don't have much time left. What could happen in the next year's COP21 is, I think I'm a bit optimistic because United States, luckily with shale revolution, already has a set targets of reducing CO2 emission by 30% in the power sector, thanks to the shale gas. And also China, because of the slowdown, economic slowdown, the demand of energy is slowing down also, and efficiency, all other elements, China may commit some kind of targets of or peaking of the CO2 emission much earlier than originally thought. It was considered 2035 or beyond, but now government is saying 2025. Some economists say even 2020. If that is the case, it is very close to what IEA thinks is a sustainable 450 scenario. So China, US is together will set the tone in Paris for the reduction of the CO2. Then other part of the world must abide by it. So US and China has a good chance of leading toward at least to some extent, may not fulfill the whole scenario of 2 degrees, but at least to move toward that sustainable scenarios. And this is the bottom-up approach, not from top-down. So in that sense, something happens. So I'm warning Japanese audience that Japan is somewhat taken it granted that thanks to our Fukushima accident, we don't have any nuclear power, so the world will allow us not having any targets. That kind of optimism or pessimism, whichever the way, is happening in Japan. But I'm cautioning, it's not the case, because China and US may be ready to commit something which is to some extent surprise, but certainly it is the possible scenario which could happen in Paris next year.
Hello, my name is Mitoni Ramos. I'm a second-year student of Sustainability Management. I got a question for Professor Roach. You talk about interdependency between China and the US being a healthy relationship. I wonder if this is always the case. For instance, with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which China is actually excluded. What do you think would that still benefit China, for instance? Because obviously it's out of it. And also it's known that a lot of people, particularly with the elections already passed, a lot of people in the GOP support that heavily. And although some Democrats do approve it, and President Obama has also signed up to it, there's some key Democrats who have blocked the TPP. What are your thoughts about it?
TPP excluding China is a recipe for disaster. And it's just indicative of the belligerence on trade policy that has been just an ongoing feature of this increasingly contentious codependent relationship. There are two trade deals in the air right now, TPP sponsored by America and RCEP sponsored by China, which by the way excludes the US. If both of these deals get done, and it's debatable, they would divert trade. And that goes against the basic precepts of trade liberalization, of including trade and benefiting the partners. There's overlap between Asian nations that have been invited to participate in both. And I think it's incumbent to collapse the negotiations of both of these agreements into one and bring China into the fold. There's a track to do it, and the track is a bilateral one that would involve the US and China making joint progress on a bilateral investment treaty, which has been discussed for the last couple of years, and virtually no progress was made on that at the Strategic and Economic Dialogue last July. Trade frictions, currency, unfair trading practices, cyber now, these are classic characteristics of the blame game of codependency, and it'll take leadership and vision for both countries to be more inclusive rather than exclusive in utilizing trade as a vehicle to move to a more constructive interdependency.
My name is Vincent Brancato. I'm a co-chair of the Environmental Stewardship Committee at the New York Society for Ethical Culture. I also spent most of my career in the steel industry dealing with Asia as well as other parts of the world. Mr. Tanaka, I'm very glad you addressed the concept of conservation, but we also addressed hydrofracking. And I'm curious if in our calculations, your calculations of the climate impact, if you are considering the leakage of methane both in production and in transit. And then when we talk about that, and we look at the problems with that in Western countries, when we have a developing country like China, for example, where we've seen quality with many industrial products, do we really trust it will happen well? Do we trust it will happen well with nuclear energy in China? These are concerns I'd like to hear your opinion on.
Okay.
I'd also mention that hydrofracking really endangers water sources, which is a big problem in China. And I'd like to mention that the TPP is objected to because the text is unknown as yet, as you may know. That's part of the reason it's not getting approval. It cannot be studied.
Hydrofracturing or fracking of the shale development is certainly has a risk of leakage, and in some places like Europe, where the urban and very much population condensed areas prohibit hydrofracturing. I think this is a matter of more technological solution. I mean, technically speaking, if you seal the pipeline or line of drilling, I don't see any reason to worry about the leakage of methane. So it can be solved by technology as well as necessary regulation. Of course, the methane has a huge impact for the global greenhouse gas effect, we know. But I think this is a much more technical or regulatory issue than the fracking itself. The second point, China can really do the hydrofracturing. This is an interesting question. I think Chinese government is very keen to move into this area. And its determination is very remarkable. So it may delay. There are lots of skepticism because China may not have enough water, China may not have pipeline system, or China, the geography is, geology is different, so it should be deeper. New technology is necessary. Price controlling is not working. System of holding the lands, etc., is different from the US. There are 100 reasons that China may not proceed as quick as US. But China needs it, and in such a situation, Chinese government will definitely develop shale gas to replace as much as for the coal. And to import LNG or import pipeline gas from Russia, China needs a competitive rivals to get a better deal. So it will happen, I think, even it may take some time. TPP is just for you.
No, it's okay.
There is no technological way that avoids leaking of methane so far. So far, there is none.
Well, always innovation technology is there. So don't be too pessimistic. And leakage of methane, certainly we understand this is a risk, but I think technically it can be solution. There can be solution. That is my view. But.
Hi, my name is Lucy Bai. I'm first-year sustainability management student. My question, in essence, is how can millennials help to solve the energy crisis issue? And the context around my question is that trying to make connection between the two presentations is that, one, we have the consumer behavior drives up the demand. Therefore, we need energy to feed that demand. And that's quintessentially my simplified way of seeing where we are at the crisis. I mean, to solve that, you can have technological innovation, you could have, population decrease or self-regulation. Those are some of the theories that are out there. But in your opinion, as millennials, we're doing a lot of grassroots movement to try to, drive that change for the future. And in your opinion, even from an economic perspective, what do you think it takes for us to make it into like a globalized effort, so to make more impactful change?
I love that question. It's a wonderful question. I've been told, now you're the millennials, so you can correct me if I'm wrong, that unlike your parents who are addicted to the material world and excess consumption, that you have other things in mind in defining your lifestyles, your value proposition, and the unnecessary accumulation of things is not as high on your list as it is for your parents, which is my generation. I don't know if that's true, but I think as I look at the world's largest consumer, this country right here, where 70% of our output goes to satisfy domestic consumption, no country has ever come close to that. And we did it in a way that really underscores our addiction to this material trappings of the so-called affluent society. We took the consumption share to a record at a time when incomes were flattening out. Pretty extraordinary to think that we did that, but we did. And we squared the circle by using a credit bubble to borrow against a housing bubble. I mean, just the height of irresponsibility. And that sort of a dynamic was fueled by our central bank, the great maestro Alan Greenspan, the world's greatest central banker. He condoned this, as did his counterparts in the White House and the Congress, because you could deliver growth forget the consequences of whether or not that growth was sustainable or not. Well, the music stopped in 2008, and the response of the powers that be was, let's do quantitative easing to get the markets up and get people spending again out of manufactured wealth. What you can do as millennials is just say no, that maybe we should think about things like consuming within our means and rebuilding our national savings so we've got a foundation for future growth that will allow a more sustainable outcome, sustainability from the standpoint of economic activity, but also sustainability from the way in which we treat the resources of the planet. So, I love the question, and you guys just gotta keep asking the question and expressing yourselves as loudly as you can when you see the power structure urging you to go back to the old way, because the old way is really not a sustainable way.
Yeah, I just add I cannot agree more to that. Lots of the data which I showed you from the IEA document, they don't assume any kind of lifestyle change happens. Lifestyle change makes a huge difference in the energy consumption pattern. So if we have a sustainable future, that would happen, or that must happen. Otherwise, really sustainability cannot be achieved. So that is happening in a fast-growing country like China or India. Otherwise, this is very difficult. So lifestyle change, this is a kind of keyword of making sustainability for us.
Let's take one last question, okay?
Okay, I'm so lucky to be the last one to fare away. Actually, good evening, professors. I'm Susan from SIPA of Columbia. My question, actually, I've got a question about actually it's based on the vision that Professor Tanaka proposed on a collective energy security framework in Asia. So my question actually is, maybe it's for Professor Roach, that do you think that the U.S. can play a role in this vision, in the shaping of collective energy security framework in Asia? And what, if yes, so what can the U.S. offer? And do you think that this kind of framework could be the stone that can kill two birds from the perspective of the United States? At one hand, it can improve the relationship, the interdependence between the U.S. and China. At the other hand, make Japan happy. That's my question. Thank you very much.
I was struck in watching the presentation of Tanaka-san in looking at the bars in terms of reliance on Middle East oil rising sharply in Asia and declining equally sharply in the United States, and his very provocative comment that what's at stake for America in worrying about energy security in Asia if it is moving back into a sort of the comfort zone of self-reliance. I think that's a fair point. In the same sense, I'm also struck by the conscious shift in U.S. Asian grand strategy, the post-Middle East, if you want to call it that, pivot back to Asia in projecting American naval force into a lot of the tensions that have arisen in the South China Sea, and who knows, maybe even the East China Sea. I think, needless to say, this is not viewed, it's viewed constructively from the standpoint of the belligerents with China, such as Japan, Philippines, Vietnam, but obviously is not viewed that way from China's point of view. From China's point of view, this is a clear China containment strategy on the part of the United States. So again, to go back into this framework of codependency, the frictions in these geostrategic areas have intensified. I think at this point, the U.S. playing a constructive role in pan-regional security issues, whether they're energy or military or territorial or shipping lanes, that is really not the conclusion that I would draw from this these sparks that have been flying in recent years. But I would be hopeful that we could. Who knows? Next week, APEC, Beijing. Maybe it'll just be a big love feast where Xi Jinping and Shinzo Abe become good friends, and Xi Jinping and Barack Obama, go off and reach some fantastic deal on whether it's energy security or climate change or whatever. We can all hope, but I think it's going to take more than hope.
Yeah, could I ask one question to Mr. Roach?
Sure.
Because your experience, I would say, the explanation about the bilateral relationship with China, U.S. Reminds me of this, I told the relationship with U.S. and Japan. It was very similar. Japan was the ultimate producer, but gradually changed to the current situation. So that China may also move toward the different stage of the demography to some extent, due to the demographical change. Then the new country like India will come and play a similar role as an ultimate producer again. After India, maybe Africa. Do you think this kind of turning the position by the different region of the development stage is what would happen in the future?
India has always been the world's greatest development story. And my fear is it's likely to always stay that way.
I see.
So I think China, because maybe its history, its current political system, has much greater capability of mobilizing resources to drive economic development. India has a new government, as we know, sort of a new passion for dealing with the inertia of reforms that have been stuck for over 10 years. I'm a big believer that the poor countries of the world all aspire for economic growth and prosperity, but aspirations and being able to implement and deliver strategically are two different things. So I don't subscribe to the idea that
that's interesting.
It was Japan's turn, China's turn, and now sit back and watch.
What India lacks then?
That's another meeting. But look, I go to India a lot, and I would meet with the senior leaders there, and the questions I always got is, how did China do it? China did macro, India does micro. China saves, India is closed to foreign direct investment. There's a lot that India can learn from China. There's a lot that China actually can learn from India. There's not a lot of love between these two countries either.
That's true. Well, thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.